Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again. Your assignment for today is twofold. Part one is to listen to this very short lecture on Alexander the Great. And what's going to happen is I gave you the guided notes for this section. You are going to place it on page 18 of your interactive world history notebook. Once you're done listening to the lecture and completing these notes, you will be asked at the end of this audio to complete a very short assignment on section 5. The entire length of this assignment, both parts, should not take you more than 40 minutes tops. And if it does, it's probably because you were wasting time. So let's get started. The last thing we talked about in our in-class presentations was the Peloponnesian War. And basically, after any war, the country that was fighting this war is going to become weak. And Greek was no exception. They became weak both militarily because they lost so many men, and they also became weak economically because wars cost money. And when a country becomes weak, countries nearby see it as a target, as an easy target. And King Philip, who lived in a nearby country called Macedonia, looked at Greece as an easy target. And he wanted to attack Greece for three reasons. Number one, obviously he wanted to control it. It's a vast empire with a lot of resources. He wanted it because it's in between him and Persia, which was another country that he wanted added onto his empire. And because it was a way for him to take revenge against the Persian who had tried to invade Greece earlier. Macedonia, if you look on this map, is here in red, and down here in blue is Greece. And so again, being that they're neighbors, it's a great place to expand your empire into. Now, the problem with Macedonia is that the terrain, which means the land, was very rough and rugged, lots of mountains, very cold climates, and so people were not as close to one another because so many mountains separated them, and so they did not have city-states like the Greeks did, and they were not as culturally advanced, meaning they didn't have great philosophers, artists, or writers, but they were really, really well known for their fearless kings. The best example is King Philip, who became king at the age of 23. This guy had a vision of a huge and well-trained army. So he took all the peasants, all of the lower classes, and trained them into becoming a professional army. And one thing he invented was something called the phalanxes, where he would organize men so there were 16 men across, shoulder to shoulder, and 16 men deep. So you had squares of men formed, 16 on all sides and completely filled in the middle with men. And all the men on the outsides were armed with an 18-foot pike. So anyone attacking them would be speared. He won against the Greek in 338 BC at an invasion at the Battle of Chaeronea, and that ended the idea of Greek independence. Sadly, he never got the chance to invade Persia like he wanted because he was stabbed to death by a former guardsman at his own daughter's wedding. So his son would take over. And his son was known as Alexander the Great, who took over at 20 years old. Alexander was a student of Aristotle, who we met before, and this man was very smart. He was able to learn science, geography, literature, and philosophy. He loved being a student of Aristotle. He was very inspired by Homer's description of Achilles and a lot of other very brave gods and heroes. He learned how to be a soldier at a young age. And unfortunately, when he became king, one of the Greek city-states he had control over, called Thebes, revolted against him. He was able to quickly crush the revolution or the rebellion, and to set an example for just how strong he is as a king, he killed about 6,000 citizens of Thebes, and everyone else was sold into slavery. When you see something like that happen to your fellow Greeks, it teaches you to not rebel. And so all the other Greeks, gave up any idea of a rebellion. In 334, he led about 35,000 troops into Anatolia, which is a city in Persia. He met an army of 40,000 Persians who were quite strong, but Alexander, being that he was a fearless king, led the first attack and smashed through that Persian army. At the time, the Persian army was being controlled by King Darius III, who retreated, went back, brought some more men, and came back to attack Alexander with anywhere from 50 to 75,000 men. Huge numbers. Alexander, again, was able to break through those numbers, and he attacked Darius's city directly. King Darius got scared, as anyone would, retreated, and ran away. Darius tried to make peace, and he tried to offer all the lands west of the Euphrates, but Alexander, being that he was winning these battles so quickly, rejects and says, I don't want just the lands west of the Euphrates, I want it all. I want all of Persia. So he marched into Egypt, and at the time, Egypt was dominated by pharaohs. And he was welcomed as a liberator, and he was crowned as a pharaoh or a god king. Now, what he did was, after quite some time spent in Egypt, he set out with his army into the Mesopotamia, and he met Darius once again. But Darius had accumulated or gathered an army of about 250,000 men. And Alexander, fearless man that he was, attacked once again and won again. And Darius would run away, and that would end the Persian Empire. And now all of Persia is once again under the control of Alexander. He was able to conquer Babylon, Persepolis, Sa, all of which were royal capitals of Persia. Now, Alexander, seeing as how he was able to win all of Persia so easily, was not satisfied. He wanted to expand his empire even more. So he kept going after Darius because he wanted him dead. He kept pursuing him east until he found him near the Caspian Sea. But Darius, unfortunately, had already been murdered, and so Alexander could not get his revenge. For 3 years, he kept moving east. And the more he moved east, the more he conquered lands. And he was hoping to get all the way to the edge of the Asian continent, because that would mean he conquered it all. In 326 BC, he reached the Indus River, found in current-day India, and he fought off the Indian army and marched 200 miles after. Now, when you look at all of these military conquests, the entire thing took about 11 years. And after 11 years of marching and fighting and killing and trying to stay alive, his soldiers kind of gave up. They had very low morales, they were tired, and they just wanted to go home. So they put a lot of pressure on Alexander to end his campaign, and he finally agreed. He returns to the city of Babylon, and he came hoping that now he can settle down, organize, and unify his empire. And he wanted to build huge cities and roads and harbors, and he had amazing plans set out. But unfortunately, he became ill with a fever and died a few years later at the very, very young age of 32. So since he became king at 20 until he died at 32, you're looking at a 12-year reign in which he was able to conquer an astounding amount of land. His generals fought for control, and they ended up dividing this huge empire that Alexander had won over. Antigenes became king of Macedonia and all the Greek city-states. His general Ptolemy took over Egypt, became pharaoh, and Seleucus took more of old Persian Empire, and it became what was known as the Seleucid Empire. All of them governed with complete power over their subjects, which is a complete contradiction to the fact that all city states were once democracies. And now they were being controlled by one person. Now, what you're going to do is something very, very simple. You're going to be looking at something called the Hellenistic culture, which is the culture that Alexander put together. During his campaign, because he was meeting all of these new people, Alexander wanted to combine the culture of the Persians, which he had dominated, to his own Greek culture. So he started to dress like the Persians, and he started to do a lot of their same customs, and he even married a Persian woman so that Persians would be more accepting of him. He started to build new cities, and he started to make these cities centers of Greek culture, like Alexandria, which is a huge city in Egypt named after him. After his death, trade also became more and more of a common thing between all of the lands that he was able to win over. So, when you read about the Hellenistic culture, you're going to discover that he was able to combine Greek, Persian, Arabian, Indian cultures together. And that this whole cocktail of cultures is going to become known as the Hellenistic culture of Alexander the Great. What I want you to do is I want you to read pages 146 to 149. As you're reading, I want you to fill out the graphic organizer I gave you. And the most important thing about this, when you're filling out the bottom graphic organizer, is to make sure that you include as many details as possible. Please don't do this assignment to get it done quickly. Do it so that when you are capable of revisiting it, you can actually read what you wrote down, and it will actually make some sense to you. Okay, so once again, read the pages, and as you're reading, fill out the graphic organizer. Thank you for tuning in once